Chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. I want to welcome you to the regular meeting of this committee for Monday, February 13th, 2012. It's now 12 minutes after 2 o'clock, and I'm joined by my colleagues, the Honorable Paul Kretz and the Honorable Tony Cardenas, and we are expecting our other members to arrive shortly, but we're going to go ahead and get started. In the meantime, anybody who would like to submit public comment, please fill out a public comment card and bring it forward. We'll be taking general public comment at the completion of today's agenda after we complete the agenda items. Now, we're going to have a number of items on the agenda today that are going to require quite a bit of discussion. One, of course, is the FSR. We also have a number of items that will be considered in closed session. So let me start first by asking how many people who are here on closed session items? Okay. So as those are the first items on the agenda, to make it convenient for all those of you who aren't here on closed session items, I think what we're going to do is retire to the other room to consider the closed session items. And why don't we go ahead and read those out now? Let's call those items now.
Sir, actually, did you have any items that you wanted to move on consent today? No. No. Okay. All right. So then that means items 1 through 5 we will take in the back then. No, he didn't have any consent.
We're going to move into closed session. All right, so we're going to retire now to the other...
No, we don't. No.
Okay. All right, so the next matter on the agenda would be item 6, the FSR, but I'm looking for Mr. Santana. I think we're going to hold off a minute until he can get here on number 6, and let's proceed to item number 7.
Yep. Item number 7 is the City Controller report relative to a fiscal year 2010-11 report on the application of agreed-upon principles related to Article 13B appropriation limit calculation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Matthias Farthan for the Office of the Controller. I'm joined with Liz Lee from Office of the CAO. And what you have before you is simply the external auditor's review of the annual calculation performed by the Office of the CAO. There were no exceptions noted by the external auditor. If you have questions regarding the actual appropriation limit, CAO is here to discuss that.
Colleagues, any questions on this matter?
No, sir.
All right, seeing none, we can note and file that report and move to item number 8. Thank you.
Item number 8 is the City Controller report relative to the Reserve Fund Statement of Condition, and the status is all Reserve Fund loans as of September 30th, 2011.
Good afternoon. Matthias Farthan for the Office of the Controller on this item as well. And before you is the quarterly report prepared by the Office of the Controller regarding the status of reserve fund loans. The report pretty much is broken up in the cover page, pretty much has 2 tables, Table 1 and Table 2. Table 1 summarizes the total reserve fund loans that were outstanding as of September 30th of 2011. That total amount was $44.9 million. That's composed of 2 parts. One is reserve fund loans that had been approved by council, which total $11.9 million. And then the second portion are Charter Section 261 loans, which totals $33 million. Table 2 breaks down the grand total amount. It pretty much provides a status of what departments have submitted to the controller regarding those loans. For instance, how many of those loans will be repaid by year end, how many will be repaid upon receipt of an invoice from a billing department, and different categories. And then if you proceed through the report, then attachments 1 through 3 pretty much provide the detail behind the summary. If you have a question regarding any of those items, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this time.
Mr. England?
Yeah, quick question. Just on the where the revenue was delayed, was the city staff on time in submitting their request for the claim or the paperwork?
It's yes and no. Most of the time, on the 33 million, the Charter 261 loans, it's pretty much at the end of the year, the department has encumbered funds that are supposed to be backed up by a special fund, but they haven't actually expended the money yet, so they can't actually bill for the revenue. So on some of the items, it's just simply waiting for the work to actually be performed and the payments to occur, and at which point then the reimbursements can happen. In other instances, there is sometimes a delay when it comes to the billings, and that's what would be detailed on the detailed listing of the reserve fund loans. That would be attachment 2. It's actually broken up into 2 different sections, and the second section actually has the detail behind those Charter 261 loans.
But they don't suggest why they would have been delayed in those cases.
Sometimes it'll be there in the detail. Some of them provide more detail than others. We do work with the CAO to periodically report back to Budget and Financing Council, because then that'll be the official process where departments will either request that some reserve fund loans be written off, or what the current status is, or how they'll be resolved as far as what's going on with them. Again, this report simply just provides the actual status at this point,
Right.
and then any recommendations regarding how to proceed forward are usually handled through separate reports.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So a number of the departments were requesting write-offs totaling 4.2 million. And
That is correct.
So what's the process for making such a request and approving it, and when there is a history of loans having been written off, is the CAO informed of that so that our current budgetary decisions can be made in the context of prior write-offs of reserve?
Yes, and that can happen through several ways. The departments can always write an individual report requesting that it be written off, or they can write a letter to the CAO to request that, they either include it in a financial status report, or in the past, the Budget and Finance Committee may instruct the CAO to work with departments to report back to get them all handled in one separate report. And we have worked with the CAO in the past to get that report prepared and submitted to your committee.
Yeah, Elizabeth Lee of the CAO's office. Yes, in the past, we've submitted requests to Budget and Finance and the Council to, present write-off requests from the departments. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other questions on this one, colleagues? Okay, seeing none, we can note and file the report. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
And I apologize, colleagues, but there was a card on number 7. So without objection, I'd like to ask Jim McQuiston if you would still like to comment on number 7. You can come on forward. Sorry, I missed your card, Mr. McQuiston.
You're almost in. Jim McQuiston, on item 7, you'll notice that the report does not really say that they examined it very carefully, but they did look over the figures, and they didn't see anything obvious. There is a problem, though. Actually, Article 13C and D also need reports, and because of the loans, so-called loans and whatnot, some of them are not loans, they're just transfers, and so we're actually transferring materials. The problem is with Articles 13C and D that you're not supposed to charge in excess of what it actually costs, and if you have material that you can transfer because it's excess, then someone is going to ask, well, how come you had the excess? And you notice that the CAO report that we're going to talk about later talks about the telephone tax, that there might be a $750 million lawsuit. And the same thing can happen on the other ones, and we really haven't gone into that with just looking at Article 13B. So there is a report that's necessary to go in a little bit deeper and make sure that we're operating within the concept of all three articles.
Thank you. All right, so now we can return to item number 6, the FSR. Mr. Santana.
Yep, this is the CAO's mid-year or third financial status report, fiscal year 2011-12.
Good afternoon, Miguel Santana, CAO.
And Mr. Santana, before you begin, colleagues, we've got a full house here, as you can see, of people interested in this report. So after what I'd like to do is ask Mr. Santana to give an overview report of the FSR, and then at the conclusion of his report, if we have specific departmental questions that any of you would like to propose, I'd like to, if you could indicate to me which departments you would like to hear from so that we can let everybody else go back to work. I think that would be a good approach to take. So, Mr.
You're popular already.
Or John Lewis can wait until the end again. Mr. Santana, go right ahead.
Yes, you should have two reports, one that we issued last week and one that we issued, I think, today. That's a supplemental that included a number of minor changes that we became aware of after the release of our report. Let me start off by saying that we do this on a quarterly basis, and it's one of the things that bond rating agencies actually applaud the city for, in that we look at our budget on a not just at the beginning, at the end of the year, but we look at it annually, on a quarterly basis. And during that time, we report to you as to how departments are doing, and we also identify solutions to mitigate any shortfalls that we're finding. So at the end of the fiscal year...
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry, Mr. Santana. Point of clarification, you formally report quarterly, but you're in a constant review of the budget all the time.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to correct, your wording could be misinterpreted that you only get to looking at the budget quarterly, but you report publicly and to the council quarterly, but you are in fact monitoring the budget and the cash flows year-round.
Yeah, it's a daily activity. So the minute that you adopt this FSR, we're busy working on the next one. So it takes us on a quarterly basis to sort of find benchmarks to report to you. But Mr. Cardenas is absolutely correct. It is an ongoing process. To illustrate that point, in our report, we provide sort of the larger context over the last few years in terms of this time in the year when the FSRs in the mid-year have reflected a change. And in 2007, it was 155. 2008, it was 110. 2009, 209. Last year was 54, and this year 72. And of course, I'm reporting deficits. I'm not reporting surpluses. This is not a healthy way to function. Let's just be clear about that, where we adopt a budget and we're trying to figure out, we're constantly playing catch-up throughout the course of the year. But it's an important thing to do. We ultimately want to get to a place where we're not operating in a constant deficit mode, where, in fact, our budget is as close as possible to the reality, and that expenditures are maintained to that reality. But it is what it is, and we're making progress. In this particular report, we identify that we have found solutions to mitigate the shortfall that was identified in the last FSR. In the last FSR, we had $50 million approximately worth of solutions. We had $20 million approximately outstanding. Those 50 million solutions have been vetted and validated. 20 million of that, or approximately 20 million of that, comes from the ERIP. If you recall, when ERIP was first approved, it was approved where we spread out the payments that retirees are expected to receive once they retire over a period of time. The goal was, of course, that the general fund would absorb those costs, and we've been unsuccessful in having that happen. Keep in mind that each department who saw staff leave through ERIP benefited from that. And so when we went back and we had warned departments back in the fall, actually, that we may actually encounter the sweeping of the ERIP. We did so because those savings have been ongoing. Those positions have not been replaced. It was actually required as part of ERIP that a very handful of positions actually be replaced. 7% in total of all the positions could be replaced over a 15-year period. So we're required to have tight control over that. The remainder of the solution we found through a surplus in the Health Benefits Trust Fund, revenue from the airport, water and power, and a few other places. As we reported, there isn't one major issue that has created this deficit. It's been a combination of different problems, some of which we could sort of start seeing at the beginning of the year, others that were unanticipated. And at the same time, the solutions are not just one big solution. There are a variety of solutions that my staff developed in going through the budget very carefully, trying to find ways to avoid significant disruptions in the city through layoffs and major cuts. We also talk about the status of our revenue. Our revenue, fortunately, is pretty much in aggregate where we budget it to be. It's about a 1.9% increase, which is fairly conservative. During the budget season last year, we had a significant conversation about whether it was conservative enough, but it turns out that it's pretty much close to what we expect it to be. The sales tax, which is the most sensitive to the economy in January, is above where it was last year, which is a sign, again, that the economy is slowly improving. And it's certainly consistent with what we're seeing on a national level. The transient occupancy tax is doing strong, and in Los Angeles continues to be a major point of destination for tourists from around the world and around the country, and our hotel rooms are reflecting that. There's some reductions. We saw a slight reduction in the transfer, the DWP transfer. And there's others that are at risk. The documentary transfer tax receipts are slightly above last year's level, but are still 3.6 million below budget. The utility users tax receipts, because of the falling natural gas prices, are below budget. And the business tax is about 4 million below plan, according to our financial system, although 85% of our business tax comes in February, March, and April, so it's not a true reflection of it. Most of it we don't see later on in the year. As we discussed at our last meeting, we also issued a report that talked about the four-year outlook. We are expecting a slightly better outlook than what had been previously projected in light of the latest valuations we received by the two pension systems. So our budget deficit for next fiscal year, starting July 1st, is expected to be between 150 and 200 million. Previously, I had reported that it would be closer between 200 and 250 million. So that's, again, a sign that we are moving in the right direction. The other sign of good news is that our reserve fund is stronger. We had budgeted 177 million. It is now 199 million, and it's just shy, about $20 million shy of the 5% of general fund receipts, which is a policy that this committee and the council have adopted, and one that we get evaluated regularly by the bond rating agencies. I just had a series of bond rating calls last week to prepare for the next bond issuance, and spoke about the reserve fund, and that's something that was received favorably by them, an indication that the city's stronger, and showing a healthy reserve fund, again, is a good sign of that. Again, a 5%, just as a reminder, is the floor. It should not be seen as the ceiling. And the one thing that we are recommending to start aggressively budgeting for in the future is for those things that we see looming in the sky, the dark clouds, particularly the Ardon case, which is floating out there. The worst case scenario is 750. Even if it's half that, the annual debt service for a bond of about $500 million is close to $50 million a year. So we need to start planning for that. Of course, there's still a discussion about the business tax and the potential elimination of the business tax. Certainly, that would create a hole in our budget that we would have to contend with. Currently,
What's the current business tax revenue?
it's about $440 million. There's some certainty around the state budget. I'm sure there's folks whose sole purpose is to find ways to take money from local governments. They were successful the last round through the elimination of the CRA. Just to reaffirm your sound decision not to be the successor agency, one of the things that we would be spending a lot of time talking about right now is how we were going to deal with that if the decision would have gone the other way. So, the fact that it's something that we're monitoring but not sleeping, not, losing sleep over is a good thing in light of our own fiscal situation. And so with that, on our supplemental report, we requested some minor changes, particularly in planning, as well as to mitigate the recent sinkhole in Griffith Park that gives us access to our communication system. And so those two things are mentioned in our supplemental report so that we could have it complete. I would ask, I know not everyone's happy with the outcome of this report. Most departments had to absorb 100% of their ERIP costs, including my own office. Both public safety departments had to also absorb it. If there's going to be any changes to accommodate other departments, I would recommend that the corresponding reductions also be found so that the reserve fund is kept intact, so that there isn't a reduction to that fund as a way of mitigating that shortfall. So we'll be happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Color? Sorry? You want to hear speaker cards first?
Just a hand. Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead, if you could just, we'll use this microphone for the public. We have 3 speaker cards. If anybody else would like to speak on the FSR, please fill out a card and bring it forward. Our first speaker is Jim McQuiston, followed by Charles Leone. Mr. McQuiston.
Jim McQuiston. As I said earlier, I'm sorry that Mr. Parks is not on the committee anymore, because he certainly went into great detail and fleshed out a lot of the things in this. Usually we've had these in the city council chamber because they were so extensive. I do want to say I've done a little calculation on this. I haven't gone through the entire FSR, but in the little time that I've had it, I've noticed that actually we're still 68 million deficit. I don't agree with the figures, because you have to understand the way we do our accounting here. Our accounting is really a cash system, and so we can push things off and don't have to include them. But one of the things that we've always done is we've had our bank account, and our bank account has always been income. So if we have a bank account of, say, $100 million, we count it as income for that year, even though it doesn't come in that year. And in this particular case, we're counting some loans which won't supposedly come due in this time, and therefore we can say the budget is balanced on that basis. So when you add all those things together, I come up with 68 million. We're still going to be out. The other thing that I want to say is our reserve fund is not maintained the way we said we were going to keep it. We also were going to have a reserve for special difficulties. For example, the last police actions on the campus, and we don't have that fund. We're not even counting it in our reserve fund now. So we have those things which we have to look at. And the last thing I want to say is one of the difficulties is that we're transferring funds which are earmarked. And when we transfer funds which are earmarked, we have to count them as a loan. We're borrowing them.
Thank you, Mr.
And we're getting up above our borrowing capacity
Got your
according
point,
to the
Mr.
state law.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Charles Leone, followed by Dr. Weissman. Is Charles still here? I saw him earlier. I don't see him in the room. Okay, Dr. Weissman, you're up.
First of all, welcome to the new members of this committee. I must pay homage to what Mr. Parks has done with this committee over the last several years. Somebody has to say that. Jim said it. I echo it. He's done an extraordinary job with a very difficult task. You know what you're faced with.
And we said it, too, at the last meeting.
Excuse me?
And we said it, too, at the last meeting. So
I'm sorry, this
go right
is
in.
my first opportunity, and I couldn't avoid saying something nice about him. Now I'll say something nice about you. And I know you to be a meticulous, and you're next, Mitch. It's okay. I'm not going to deny anyone. I know you to be a meticulous people person, and this is a meticulous task. I'm here as one of the budget advocates. I'm called a budget advocate emeritus. The budget advocates have been looking at this budget for the last several years in greater and greater detail. And I think you will find us to be an excellent resource for you. I would ask you to call upon us. Mr. McQuiston has for many years been called the sixth member of the Budget and Finance Committee. I would propose that you appoint a James McQuiston accessory or advisor to the committee from the budget advocates, because a close relationship between what we know about the budget and what you receive about the budget, I think, will be a real edifying help to you. In the 20 seconds left, I have to talk TRAN. And I find that the TRAN saved, in quotes, $30,000 to the fire and police and $30 million and $15 million for the lacers. But that money is going to go straight back into paying the city's obligations, so that's not a saving. And I would caution you to take what Mr. Santana has put before you with a good deal of caution and look to some other sources to verify what you're going to be dealing with. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. All right. Members?
Yeah, I've got it.
First of all, let's
Rattle off the department.
let's make our list of departments so that we can get people back. If Mr. Leone is not here, we're going to go ahead and close public comment, then proceed. Go ahead. Mr. Cardenas, did you have some? No. Okay. Mr. Englander? Okay. Let's just figure out who we're going to be asking questions of so we can send everybody else packing.
Okay, I've got a dozen. Now, CAO, obviously, I'd like to ask, but also whoever can answer any questions on the Mount Lee issue, that's in the FSR. I've got a question on LAPD, street lighting, building and safety, and sanitation, and they're pretty quick questions. Again, Mount Lee, LAPD, street lighting, building and safety, and sanitation.
Okay. No? Okay.
I don't have any.
Mr. Kretz? Okay, so I'm going to add to that. So we have CAO Fire, LAPD, street lighting, building and safety, general services, the city clerk, and rec and parks. Anybody else? Missing anything? All right. Everybody else? Thank you for coming.
Run.
And congratulations, you better get out quick. Better get out quick, because it's not going to last long once we start. Okay, thank you all very much, seriously.
We would like to go through yours first? Mine are pretty quick, yeah. Okay.
All right, Mr. Englander, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On this, first, in looking at the Mount Lee issue, and so my question on that was, have we looked at other revenue sources in terms of either UASI grants, because it's a public safety regional issue where there may be either or ARA funds or other opportunities where clearly it's, I hate to use the term shovel ready, but it's pretty shovel ready and has been. Are there other opportunities to look at some grant funding or other funds for that?
We asked the same question to the department, and we were reassured that there were at least no immediate source of funding available. On the ARA grants, I know most of that money is already spent, and so or earmarked for a particular project, and so we're in the last year of ARA, so that may that one. On the UASI grants, there's a process and a larger body of which we're a member of, but ultimately control. I don't know the specific answer to that, but if there's someone who can...
Also, on that, whether we've applied or not is one thing, but the other idea of reprogramming some of the UASI money that we haven't spent on other sources.
That is a potential option. However, it is a time-sensitive option. We have a very time-sensitive project that needs to move forward. In order to take any grant monies and reprogram, we actually have to go back to the grantor and get approval, and that can be a lengthy process to do, and there's no guarantee that they would approve it, and we're more concerned that we need to have this fixed sooner rather than later.
Okay.
I mean, I think just to kind of follow up on that, we certainly are going to look to see whether there are other opportunities. We did look at gas tax, and unfortunately it's not a public road, so it wouldn't qualify. Right. This is being that particular, center with all of, many of the data towers and things of that sort. We have an immediate need to sort of get that road up and running so we can get folks up there. With that washout, it's just we don't have access other than hiking up through that impassable road. I would like to also add, I mean, in the recommendation we include 900,000 BOE. I think it's concerned that actually may be an additional 200,000, but right now what we have right now is the 900,000 to get things squared away and for them to get an on-call contractor to get up there and start working on the road.
Let me ask you this, just final question on this then. Is there a way to look at reprogramming some of that money for reimbursement so we can go ahead and do it in the FSR but then come back for reimbursement?
And that's what I was whispering in Patty's ear right now, is to see if there was a way we could actually request reimbursement if we go ahead and spend it. The grantor usually likes to approve it in advance, but it doesn't hurt us to go back and say, look, this is directly relates to our ability to reach our communication system, and so it seems like an appropriate thing to do is to simply request for the reimbursement. The worst thing to do is turn us down and we're no further off.
They can turn us down. My staff person was whispering as well that for the most part the UASI monies have been for technical infrastructure, so like if we were actually improving the radio tower, we could probably have a good chance, but the chances of them saying they would improve the road are probably fairly slim.
Okay, we're going to look at it. Okay, great.
So we'll look into it either way.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. My next one was on the LAPD reimbursement on the Occupy. From my understanding here on the report, we have here is the only department that's being supplemented for their overtime costs. GSD, Sanitation have also incurred costs. We're also still waiting for the reports to come back to the Public Safety Committee on the total costs from all departments. I believe the only one we were actually left waiting for was LAPD's, and the only thing they've come up with so far was the overtime costs, and then in the FSR, they're the only department asking for it back. In addition, I believe there are numerous statements made that they wouldn't be doing that, and now we're doing that. And so I was trying to figure out why.
The appropriation to LAPD was part of their operational plan, so please note, with regards to the operational plan, we are sweeping $4 million from the department that goes to the UB Reserve for Economic Uncertainty.
The operational plans, have any of the operational plans been presented or approved by council, or at least presented to council?
No, I mean, there's discussion in the FSR concerning the operational plan. Most of the departments were able to absorb the ERIP payout within their salary accounts. Some have made transfers. There's a few departments that weren't able to absorb that payout, and that's few and far between. That included GSD, the Public Works Board, and the Planning Department. But with regards to LAPD specifically, we did sweep $4 million from that ERIP account.
Right, but then they're asking for a portion of it back
Correct,
and overtime
correct.
for...
So, I mean, if you wanted to...
What I would suggest is if there's any way we can hold off on that until we have the full report back as well, and that we don't do any reimbursements yet until we have the full amounts back and we can figure that out at a later date.
We did ask all departments, we could certainly do that. We did ask all departments for whatever costs they incurred due to the Occupy LA.
Right, we're still waiting.
And you know, we were taking it as that they were fine. LAPD obviously did incur a significant cost due to that, and because it was sort of an anomaly of an event, the other option could have been is to have the chief have the officers taken in time instead, but because this was such an unusual circumstance, they made the request that it actually be paid off, but we could hold off on the rest.
If we can hold off on that item, since it's before another committee, and then we'll bring it back at a later date, that would be great. And then,
Is there any objection to that?
Any objection? Thanks. And then on street lighting, which I have as, my question on that was, we're looking at a loan borrowing costs, and I don't see a cost-benefit analysis on the loan for the LED replacement. It was a $6.8 million loan from DWP to accelerate the program, when it sounds like the program was going on time and on budget from the previous reports. So the question is, why then would we borrow $7 million now, and then what's the cost-benefit of doing that in terms of the savings in energy and et cetera? And I didn't see anything on that, and why we're borrowing it to rush that through now instead of staying on the plan.
Janice Chang, Office of the CAO. The Bureau of Street Lighting was requested by the Mayor's Office to accelerate the program. They're currently working on a MOU agreement with the LADWP to secure additional loan funding to accelerate the program to be finished in 4 years instead of 5 years. And the MOU is still in progress, and this action is to appropriate the funds if the MOU is approved. I'm not aware of any reports coming forward at this point to discuss the cost benefits of doing this. Our office is preparing some information for the Mayor's Office at this point.
If there's no objection, I'd like to bring that one back as well, or send it to Public Works to at least look at why we're accelerating over just a 1 year period where we're borrowing $7 million and the cost of doing that when we're on time on the program, if that's okay. I just don't know. We haven't seen any of these reports. I guess they're being generated, as you suggested, but I don't know why we're doing it. Any objections? Okay. And then, thank you. And it's probably a great thing. And once we see the report, and it's a great thing that we're going towards, cleaner lighting, more efficient lighting. But if there's a cost of borrowing money to speed up the program,
And actually, this is sort of shed some additional light on it. Yes, the mayor's office.
some light on it. Really?
Very nice.
You've been waiting all day.
That's true. Yeah, I've been waiting for that. That was a good setup. So, the basis of the proposal is to accelerate the program within 4 years versus 5. But please remember, there is actually a loan for the program right now. Street lighting is getting a rebate, basically a loan from DWP for the existing program, and then the savings through energy efficiency is basically paying that loan. So this would just basically accelerate that.
Okay.
So,
And then, thank you very much.
any more light?
Well, you were going to ask the clerk a question probably on the building. And then on building and safety, I think I had one thing there, is just to ask, On the extra charges for the overtime for off-hour inspections, it seems in the report that we're driving up overtime costs for the department, and I'm trying to figure out if we're actually, the off-hour inspections, if those are what's driving up the overtime costs. Are we doing more?
Are you referring to recommend, the second to last bullet on page 19?
Yes.
Now, this money for this is coming from the enterprise fund.
It was on the overtime, off-hour inspections.
That is correct. My name is Steve O'Malley, the Department of Building and Safety. Council member, just for you to know, other than the fact that this is coming from the general fund, the department is experiencing a lot of workload now based on increased construction activity. So we have a lot of backload to the extent that the developers, if they want us to move quickly to meet their time schedule, they have to pay extra for us to do the extra work, or not the extra work, but to expedite them. So they have done the planning and they've dug the holes. They want to pour concrete before we can inspect it, or rather before they can pour the concrete. We need to inspect it.
So they're paying an expedited fee.
That is correct.
To go through an expedited process, but that traditionally and historically didn't include overtime on inspections for off hours.
It is overtime for inspection off hours.
So are we capturing that overtime cost in the expedited fee as well?
That is correct. And just for you to know, the report says that we've burned a lot of overtime throughout the year. It is indeed true, and I'll give you a case for plan check as well. We used to have a goal to assign plans to engineers within 15 days of receiving the plans. We can't do that. Now we have to wait for 29 business days before we can actually assign that plan. And so in order for us to expedite anything that we do in the Department of Building and Safety, we have to charge folks so that our employees can do that on an overtime basis.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, no, I think that was all the ones I've got. Oh, and sanitation, I had,
I don't think you mentioned sanitation.
yeah, no, I did have sanitation. I had on the $20 million in surplus on the special funds that were from the various departments. I know that was being reviewed. The CAO is proposing review of the fund, and I was just wondering on a Prop 218 issue if it should be the city attorney reviewing that as well or not. If there's any 218 issues on that.
Are you referring to the fact that we have...
$4.8 million fund for this work?
Okay, so yeah, we will be reviewing that. So that's why this issue is being held off. There is possible Prop 218 implications, so the 4.8 million reduction, that's what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, that reduction is not being recommended right now in this report.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's going to be, we will discuss it and recommend it if necessary in the year-end FSR.
If we're able to do it.
Or-
Just for clarity, that's concerning the Solid Waste Resources Revenue Fund.
Identify yourself, please.
Emilio Rodriguez, CEO's office.
I actually have a sanitation question as well, if you're done.
Through. Yes, thank you.
So on the recertification process for the lifeline rate, is there some safeguard, have there been procedures put in place to safeguard against people who fall off of that program improperly and need to appeal that and have an opportunity to get back on the program? What is the policy that's in place to prevent that from happening? We've realized some significant savings, and that's good, but I want to make sure that in the process of doing that, we haven't put people off of this program who should be on it.
Correct. Sanitation has gone through a recertification process, which essentially resulted in the elimination of approximately 24,000 accounts. I couldn't speak to what the what safeguards are in place for actually people reapplying through the Office of Finance. We would have to have the Office of Finance speak to that, because they are separate processes. Sanitation has their own staff, who was involved in the recertification process per the Lifeline guidelines, and Office of Finance has a separate staff that would be involved in the screening of applicants coming back into the system.
I see. Okay. So can anybody from finance speak to that? No?
I think they left.
We could report back on
Question
that
for a
if you want.
future day.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Englander, were you done with the department? Work? Okay. I have just a few discrete questions on departments. In the there was an indication in the report that there was a $2 million revenue shortfall in the clerk's office that resulted from a delay in billing LAUSD. I just wanted to understand what the circumstances were behind that.
Holly Walcott, Executive Officer, Office of the City Clerk. Basically, we will be billing it in the same fiscal year, we just won't be receiving it. What happened in this particular fiscal year was that we would normally bill in October or November, and given our limited number of staff, those staff members were redirected toward working on the CD15 special. So that means the billing was delayed. It will be billing in March. However, we don't anticipate to get the funds this year because LAUSD still has to audit, and so we don't anticipate having any problem getting the money. It's just a matter of working on the CD15.
Okay. So those anticipated revenues that we would otherwise have anticipated in this fiscal year will come in next fiscal year, but we'll anticipate that when we're budgeting revenues for next year, right?
Right, and if it comes in any earlier, we'll notify the CAO immediately.
Okay. I want to make sure that doesn't get double counted, in other words. Okay. All right, thank you. Now, on petroleum costs, we had a significant overrun, if you will, on petroleum costs, and that was attributed in the report to an increase in the price of gasoline. But don't we already budget anticipating fluctuations in price?
That is correct. We budgeted $4 million. We put that in the unappropriated balance. That was appropriated with the second FSR to GSD.
Okay.
So this $9 million is above and beyond that appropriation for accounting for changes in price.
So at the beginning of the budgeting process for a fiscal year, what assumption do you make regarding the future price of petroleum? Do you make an assumption for increases in price? Because I think historically we could probably demonstrate that in most fiscal years there's going to be a higher price at the end of the year than there is at the beginning of the year.
Yes, Renee V. Augustine with General Services. Normally, the way we budget and we ask for the next fiscal year, we usually ask for the same amount for the current fiscal year at plus 5%.
And is that based on historical
Yes.
trends
Yes,
in
based on historical.
increases of the cost of petroleum?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. They're here. You want to direct the question? Okay. All right. One more short one for me, and then we'll go to some of the longer ones. Rec and Parks. The report indicated a shortfall in revenues from golf and camps and some other things. What was the reason attributed to that shortfall, and what steps can we take to try to bump those numbers up to try to maximize those revenues?
The department's here.
Noel Williams, Department of Recreation and Parks. Actually, we'll take them one by one. The golf revenue is the amount of money that they're generating is not necessarily shortfall. The amount that they're reimbursing to the department is a shortfall. They base part of their reimbursement is based upon the number of people that they have hired, and since we've held on hiring freeze, instead of having 143, they have 120, so some of the shortfall is related to paying back the department direct cost plus the cap rate.
I see.
The other minor shortfalls in pools and camps, it kind of varies from year to year. So they're kind of minor shortfalls. In the in-house capital delivery plan, it was 1.9 million below this year because those are reimbursements that we receive for performing primarily from our Quimby funds. And when we're working on other projects such as Occupy LA or PAB or other things that divert our resources from there, then we're not able to bill and receive those into our system. But we are overall on our revenue within at least $100,000 to the surplus.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any
No,
other
that's
questions
it.
for Al?
Thank you. Also, before I go to you, Mr. Roosevelt, I know you want to bring the city attorney up. Office of Finance, can I ask about the bank fees that have exceeded budget amounts, what that's attributable to? And I don't know if CAO can speak to that, or if you'd like finance.
The bank fee deficit is related to merchant card costs primarily. There's been increased usage of credit cards, and that's the cost that the city incurs with regards to that.
And why is that, though? What is the change that has caused that increase above what was budgeted?
You know, that I can't speak to.
Who can? Is there somebody here who can speak to
There's no
that?
one from finance. This is an issue that we've been monitoring, and obviously are playing catch-up as more and more people don't use cash. In most places, when you go in and when you go to pump gas, you're asked whether you accept a 35-cent charge for using your ATM card, and you press the button yes. In our case, we don't do that, so we incur that cost. And so it needs to be treated as a separate matter. I would recommend we need to really figure out why we haven't been able to resolve something that's fairly basic that most other retailers have certainly resolved, and come back with a solution, whether it's to share that cost, whether to have the same kind of process where someone accepts that added fee, or just budget it accordingly and do a better job projecting what the increases are going to be. But treating it every year in the mid-year is probably not the most effective way of doing it. So I would recommend having a separate discussion.
So we'll add that to our to-do list then as well. All right, Mr. Rosendahl.
Yes, we just received a letter from the City Attorney's Office a little bit ago, and I'd like to ask you, CAO, your position on this letter, which basically says the 1.4 million that appears to be a surplus in the City Attorney's Office, they're proposing, if this is the case, to put it back in to deal with furloughs and other issues like that. What's your take on that 1.4 million?
Well, again, as I stated from the onset, most departments absorbed 100% of their ERIP payout. We all benefited from having those early retirements, the general fund, including the City Attorney's Office. In the best case scenario, we would be able to absorb it for everyone, but we can't, which is not in the financial situation to do so. I would, if there was an interest to return some of these dollars back to the city attorney, I would recommend against reducing the number of furlough days. If you recall, most city employees agreed to make a higher pension contribution from 6% to 11%. The city attorneys chose not to at two different times, and so instead of that contribution being made towards pensions, we had to take those savings from another place, and furloughs is the one place that we did that in. There's only the city attorneys and EAA and the GSD police are the only three entities. Actually, GSD police is no longer, but really the only two that are still being furloughed through the city as a result of not accepting to make that contribution.
You know, when they didn't make it, the contract, and they went on furlough, are they, from my end, it's a matter of getting certain things done that we need done, and they're not necessarily there. Did they get their pay increases, their raises?
Yes, they did.
They got the raises because they didn't get involved with us, right?
They received a 2.25% COLA increase on July 1st, and on January 1st they received an additional 2.75% increase.
So they get over a 5% increase in their general pay.
That is correct.
And how does that add up compared to the 1.4 million and the furloughs?
Well, the furloughs help mitigate the cost of those increases.
Yeah, help mitigate it. Did it completely mitigate it or not?
I don't know what just in the city attorney's office, what the cost of we could get back to you on what the specific value of those pay increases are for the city attorney's office and compare it to the furlough number. I know the furlough number is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $9 million, if I'm correct, higher. Do you know what it is?
I think it was in the neighborhood of 10, 11. I'll have to go back and check.
10, 11. So I'll report back to you on what the total cost to the city for the 5% increase that they
I'd
received
like
this
to
year.
ask the city attorney to come up and make their pitch off of their letter. Thank you for that report, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair, Chairpersons. William Carter, City Attorney's Office. I did submit a letter this afternoon which lays out the City Attorney's objection to the mid-year FSR. In a nutshell, it's this. When the City Attorney received its budget and was approved last year for this fiscal year 2011-12, we were given a $95 million budget, and that $95 million budget, built into that was 36 days of furlough. On top of that, we were asked to repay a $1.8 million loan that we received for business and profession code penalty that we had to obtain at the end of last fiscal year. We paid the $1.8 million 17,200 loan within a month. We paid that back. Since then, since July 1st of 2011, we have worked hard to balance our budget, cut costs, impose furloughs, and we now have a $1.4 million surplus. Built into our $95 million budget was a commitment by the city to pay our ERIP, $1.8 million. We had a line item, Early Retirement Incentive Program Payout. When the council approved our budget for this fiscal year, it agreed to pay our ERIP. Now that we have done everything we've been asked to do, and more, and on top of that, imposed furloughs, we are now being asked to pay back our surplus, rather than reinvest it back into the office and do all the things that we're asked to do every day. Not just under the charter, but by you, council members. And you know how tough it is on these issues. They are not simple issues. We're not pothole fillers or tree trimmers, and I'm not being critical of them. These are not issues that are easy to solve. If they were, then we could just budget and budget for each lawsuit or each prosecution, but they're not. We do our best, and when we do extraordinary things, we seem to get penalized for it. When other departments either can't balance their budgets or don't balance their budgets, and we have a surplus, we are the target of taking that surplus away. I don't think we should have our surplus taken away. We are acting within our budget. You gave us a budget. Let us keep that money and have the general fund pay for the ERIP as we understood it was going to pay. We did not negotiate ERIP. Yes, we benefited from ERIP, but we didn't negotiate ERIP. That was a city responsibility. So having said that, it's very clear to us that the surplus should remain in the city attorney's office, so we can do the things that the city council budgeted for us, and we are operating within that budget. We are not asking for any more money. We are going to live within our budget, and we are. And if other departments don't, then we are certainly willing to have a conversation to share whatever we need to share. But I don't think it should be an arbitrary sweep from us. We have a lot of work to do through the rest of the fiscal year, and we intend to do it. We may actually have a larger surplus by the end of this year. I don't know. But I would ask at a minimum that you wait until the controller's revenue projection comes out in March before you start sweeping surpluses from us. I can't speak for other departments, but before you start to sweep, I think you should probably look at what those revenue projections are. As I heard from Mr. Santana, we're only 20 million short of the 5% that we've been trying to achieve. And before you start sweeping, I would think twice about that and perhaps you won't need to. Maybe the other departments can use that money to fill those potholes, trim those trees, and do public service.
I appreciate your advocacy, obviously, and that's why I asked you to come forward, and I asked the CAO input on that issue. If, in fact, we wait for the audit for March, Mr. Controller, whatever the figure might be, whatever period in time, how do you project to spend that? I mean, do you have complete clarity of where it would be and how it would actually maybe save us money to do that rather than sweep it in various things that you do? Can you make it compelling, besides what you just said, comment of how that money can be used? Because we're in a tough spot all around, and everybody has to deal with this surplus or not surplus.
So I think you have to look at each department's budget.
Yeah, sure.
See where they started and where they're at now.
Yeah.
See what they were told at the beginning of the year and what obligations they were asked to live within, and we did. And with respect to what we would do with that surplus, it's very clear. We would use that surplus to try to reduce the furloughs, and what we've been doing is trying to provide furlough exemptions to certain members of our office that are engaged in litigation. For example, we have people that save money every day because they defend the police department, the fire department, all the other departments. Again, the city attorney does not generate liability. Everyone else does. We end up defending everybody else. So we can't control what they do, but when those cases come to us, we'll defend them. That's worth hundreds of millions of dollars when we defend those lawsuits. If we lose one lawsuit, it'll wipe out that $1.4 million surplus like that. What's that worth? One lawyer, two lawyers, three lawyers. So what we've been doing is having targeted exemptions to furloughs. We started with our police litigation unit because in those cases, when you have use of force cases or traffic accident cases, or we also have certain furlough exemptions on our revenue generating folks, people that oversee and supervise the unfair business practice cases, those people that are taking on Deutsche Bank, WellPoint, Blue Shield, all the other big banks, those are the kinds of cases that we have to focus on. If we don't have people to do that, we're not going to generate revenue. It's a spiral to the bottom. When you furlough these people, it also impacts ordinances. Who's going to do the ordinances? Because on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the top importance, it's going to be defending the city, prosecuting crime, and drafting ordinances is at the bottom. It has to be. Because if I don't draft an ordinance, I'm not losing money in court. I have to defend the city. And so we're getting to a point where we're going to have to start furloughing or providing furlough exemptions to people that draft ordinances, just so the city can run. Because if we don't have people that, because it's not a body count anymore. It's not we have 100 people. We need the right 100 people. Because you may be seeing the same people over and over and over again, because those are the people that we have left. Because of ERIP, because of attrition, we haven't hired one person, not one, in 2 years, not one. So we're paying for ERIP, and it is the thing we're paying for twice is we've lost the institutional and legal knowledge, and now we're being asked to pay for it. And we weren't expecting to pay for that.
That's it.
Chris?
Well, first, just a comment on that. I mean, I would agree, and probably everyone in the city knows that I agree that cutting the city attorney's department I generally see as counterproductive and cost ineffective. At the same time, the employees in the city attorney's department have sort of shot themselves in the foot by being one of the few units that haven't worked with us and haven't come to an agreement to avoid these furloughs. So while it's counterproductive for us, it's also counterproductive for them, and they've insisted on doing it anyway. So it makes it difficult. If there were a way to restore some of that funding and not have it be used to mitigate furloughs, I'd probably be more open to it, frankly. And I don't know if there's a way to do that. So I'd ask the CEO if there's a way. I'd ask Mr. Carter if there's a way.
Well, I'm not involved in these labor issues. If the city has some idea of how they're going to obtain or extract concessions, that's not my role. I'm looking at this as a manager and trying to manage a department. I think we've done a very good job. I think the city attorney and the folks there have done a fantastic job managing within their budget. And certainly we could use the money in other areas. We could use it towards litigation. We could do a technology upgrade. We could buy computers that don't need chisels to get them to work. I mean, it is outrageous. We can't compete with the big law firms. There are days that we cannot e-file our documents because we don't have the right equipment. So certainly, if there's an issue about whether or not we can use it for furlough exemptions, that's certainly a decision that the council could direct. But as a manager, I have to look at where the resources are, and it's brain power, it's people power. That's what runs this city, and we need people power to run this city. If we can't use it towards people power, then we need technology, and that technology will give us a leg up, and we could use that money to buy new computers, to get upgrades, to do a lot of things that'll help us be more competitive with the law firms that fight us every day. So if that's a direction because we've asked for that too. In our budget requests, we've asked for the end of furloughs, and we've asked for technology upgrades.
Mr. Carter is correct. I mean, the department has managed to stay within its budget and hasn't made any requests, frankly, to manage hiring people from the outside to be able to stay within their budget. But your committee has also responded to the issues of the city attorney last year. In this fiscal year's budget, this is the only department that actually saw an increase to their budget of over $10 million in a context where every other department saw a decrease. And in part was to be responsive to the core mission of the city attorney's office and to recognize that they have been working diligently to stay within their budget. At the end of the day, it's at the city attorney's discretion as to how his budget is implemented. And so, but you know, I think your committee, to give your committee credit, has been in the last budget season was very responsive to that request.
And that included paying for ERIP. So we lived within our budget. We did everything you asked us to do, and now you're being asked to take that money from us. We've done everything we've been asked to do. And all we're asking you is don't take that surplus. The CAO and the city should live up to their obligations. They told us that they were going to pay for it, and we worked within our budget.
Well, I, for one, are at least open to what I've described. A couple other quick questions. We have some savings in terms of voluntary furloughs. I don't know that we've ever made an effort to get voluntary furloughs. If we think it's desirable, I know in some past years some of the unions asked us to try and do that. Is there a way to actually try and market it a little bit? And one of the things that I originally suggested, although it was met with some skepticism, but I still think is a decent idea, is to try to make it more attractive by allowing it to be lumped in a week at a time and make it more of a usable vacation for employees, so it'd be more desirable. I would think if that was something that employees actually found desirable and was marketed to them, maybe instead of saving $1 million, we'd be saving $5 million or $10 million or $15 million, something that actually had a noticeable effect on the budget. Well, so if we looked at that at all?
We currently do have a voluntary furlough program. We had it even in a time when most people were taking furloughs, and as you pointed out, it generated between $700 to $1 million even during the height of the furlough program. I haven't looked to see. I know my office produces reports on a every 6 months on how successful it is. My guess would be that more people are now taking the voluntary furlough since there's less that are being mandated, but we could report back on exactly what that looks like. So it's still available to employees now. Generally, we we encourage employees to work with their management in identifying what days to take so that it doesn't disrupt the operation side of the work that needs to be done. But And frankly, the program where most city employees took the time off between Christmas and New Year's was as a way of, while it wasn't voluntary, it was agreed upon the employees as a way of sort of recognizing that, that generally tends to be a slow week. So there may be other opportunities like that throughout the year where we could encourage and market a voluntary furlough program. So we'll report back on that.
Yeah, I assume we're not doing any marketing currently, so if we could at least take a look at that, that would be, I would think, logical. And lastly, I know in the core process, I'm not sure if it actually got into their report off the top of my head, but I know it was at least raised by Mr. Galperin that there might be some different ways that we look at some of the large documentary transfer tax opportunities, that there may have been some things that we've allowed to be missed by the way we handle that. So if that hasn't ever been looked at, I wonder if we could revisit that as well.
We're about to hire the revenue sheriff, as he's called, to implement the core recommendations. We'll make sure that that's top on his list to make sure that that gets implemented.
I think that was really large dollars involved.
Right.
So that,
and going back to your voluntary furlough program, actually one of the attachments is a status report on that program, and as of February 6th of 2012, the total amount that we've saved through the current voluntary furlough program is $1.089 million, with a total of about 31,000 hours. The biggest departments are the police department with approximately 219 worth of savings. So it's we could continue to find opportunities to expand that program.
And just to clarify, that's general fund and special fund savings. The general fund savings is about $558,000.
It seems somewhat promising without ever really trying. So I think if we tried to find ways to market it, we might actually find an extra few $1 million.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Kretz?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Thank you.
Mr. England, did you have another question that you wanted to raise?
I just one quick one to the CAO, and before we start talking about putting sweeps back or savings back in any departments and figuring out that we're out of the woods and we've saved all this money, and I think we're all in this together. And I know there was a statement, and I know Mr. Carter and the city attorney's office works really hard, and there's a lot of issues on the table. There was one statement that was made, though, that I just, with all due respect, wanted to clarify, and I know it wasn't meant that way, but I just want to put it out there. It was said the city did this, and then as a result, we suffered, and we did a better job. The city is all of us, and we're all in this together, and we have a lot of departments that are suffering equally as well, whether, and rather than go through any of the departments, I just wanted to state that I know that's not what was meant, that you guys didn't do this, but we're all in this together, and we're all suffering in furloughs that are affecting everybody as well, and hiring freezes. But with that, looking at the fact that we're not out of the woods, one of the questions that I had is about $11 million shortfall on the workers' comp account. The Human Resources Benefit Trust Fund is expected to have close to a $10.9 million shortfall, and it's being proposed that the Health Benefits Trust Fund, partially at least at $8.1 million, address the shortfall. But I believe that there's got to be a consensus with the Joint Management Labor Committee as well to do that. And so I don't know if there's a certainty if that's the case, or are we able to do this without going?
We believe that it's within our authority to do so, but we're getting that opinion from the city attorney, and we're waiting for that opinion now.
Okay, so we're waiting for the city attorney opinion on that. So what the question is, if it's not, and we don't have the authority, and the likelihood of perhaps even getting that approved, but then I'm not sure if we would, since there's a split between the labor management committees to do that. If that's the case, is there a backup plan?
Well, I sit on the committee. I would make the case that it is in the larger city interest, and especially our own employees, to utilize those funds. Otherwise, we have to find $8 million worth of cuts throughout the system, and it possibly trigger layoffs, which we're all trying to avoid. So we believe that it's within our authority, but we want to make sure that that's validated.
right.
But either way, if it's not, I'm prepared to introduce a motion at the committee asking for that. And the way the committee works, it's that it's half management, half labor, and there has to be a majority vote on both sides.
Okay.
And in the past, what we've done is we've declared impasse, and we brought it before the Personnel Committee on a separate matter, but that's the process that we've been forced to use to be able to protect the larger city from further reductions.
I figured that would probably be the answer, so I just wanted to make sure that I was correct in looking at that, and that would be the case. And if so, we potentially could be looking at, on top of this, another $8 million shortfall that we'd have to make up if that process doesn't hold true. So just keeping that in mind on looking at other surpluses or places that departments have done well before we start making quick reactions to put the money back in those departments, whether it's well needed or not. We've got to look at that, the totality of all the city revenues and expenses. So thank you for that.
And if I could add to that, I think it's also important to point out that while the revenue is as a whole at where we budgeted, we receive our biggest revenue in chunks in this latter half of the year. So, we're optimistic, but, we're seeing some trend lines in some areas that make us a little nervous. So I don't want to be back here saying, we have a shortfall again, but I also want to be straightforward about where some of the soft aspects are in our budget.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Santana, I'd like to ask you to provide a little bit more detail on the recommended actions on the fire department's budget, and I'd like a representative of the fire department to come forward, and let's talk for a moment about what were the sources of the shortfall there and what led us to this point.
Well, it's a combination of things. The first one is kind of unusual to explain. It's amazing how misinformation creates a secondary problem. As part of our agreement with the police and fire unions, firefighters were given the opportunity to opt in to provide 2% of their income for ensuring that their retiree health care would continue to grow with the rate of inflation. And there was a lot of misinformation about how that actually applied. If there was a misinformation that gave the impression that if you retire today during that time, then your retiree health care would be protected. The truth is that if you were in drop, which most firefighters who retire are in drop prior to the retirement, you were grandfathered into protecting your retiree health care. Irregardless, because of that misinformation, we had an unusual number of firefighters retire out of drop beyond what was projected, about 41 additional. So due to constant staffing, we were required to maintain a staff at a certain level. With a smaller workforce, smaller than what was anticipated even under the new deployment plan, then the reliance became on overtime. So a significant part of the shortfall is a result of the overtime overusage due to the workforce dramatically being dropped down to 41. The secondary problem that creates is that there isn't a direct match necessarily between those who are in the pool of potential firefighters to be moved around and the actual position that was lost. So that exacerbated the overtime usage for certain areas versus others. The other part of it was that the department last year, I believe, or 10-11, had adopted an injury reduction program that assumed a certain amount of savings in future years, and that fell short by approximately 1.5. And then there was there was part of what was negotiated in the UFLAC agreement that was a one-time cost to the department, which is the smallest amount, about $500,000. So the combination of all of these different issues resulted in the $12.8 million shortfall in the department. But certainly if there's someone from the department to go into greater detail, but it was things that, it was hard to project that in the budget season, in part because we didn't know the impact of particularly the labor agreement that allowed firefighters to make that 2% contribution. Concurrently, interesting enough, we didn't see that in the police department. We did see a higher number of people enter drop the quarter prior to the fiscal year starting due to the potential of the labor agreement being ratified. But the numbers of those entering drop has pretty much been less than what is normally anticipated. So people basically decided to enter drop a little sooner than they would have anyway, sort of the way we saw in ERIP on retirements. We didn't see a mass exodus from the city workforce due to, but we did see it in the fire department.
Okay. Can we have the fire department come up, please, for 1 second? So when did you begin to perceive this excessive number of retirements from drop? Did that happen immediately after the policy was adopted regarding retiree health?
Yes, we saw it in the first quarter of the year, Salvador Martinez Fire Department, council member, when the bulk of those members, as the CEO had stated, did retire. So it occurred early in that first quarter, and that, as he had mentioned, caused an increase in basically overtime accounts, because we were going to use those members to basically fill in spots at a straight time level. Since they were not available, the only alternative was to work other members overtime, which increased our cost.
And what's the reporting process by which the CAO's office becomes informed of a significant event like that, where you have spiking unanticipated overtime, increased number of retirements that were unanticipated?
We, through our fiscal financial status reports, but we also have ongoing conversations with our CO analysts, informing them of these type of incidents that are significant, that would impact our projected expenditures, as well as any additional impacts that might have on our budget.
My concern here is that had the council been able to take actions on this earlier, some of this might have been able to have been addressed in different ways. For example, in the number of authorized positions that were available in the fire department, there might have been strategic options available other than building up the overtime account had that been considered. But I think this was not considered even in the last FSR, and to my knowledge, it's never been brought to the attention of the council before now. So, and the horse is out of the barn at this point, pretty much, I guess. So I think it's important when we have a situation like this where there's a significant change in policy, as soon as we begin to see the ramifications of that policy were not what the council intended to have happen. I mean, I supported this plan, the new deployment plan, and the expectation that it was going to reduce costs, not increase costs. I'm not interested in a plan that's going to reduce the number of ambulances in my district and then end up costing me more. So when we have a situation like that where costs are increasing, I think it's incumbent upon the department to bring solutions to the council so that we can start addressing that.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Santana, did you?
No, I agree. I think this is one that, knowing that sooner perhaps we kind of mitigate. Our options are, frankly, a little limited because it takes about a year to start up hiring again in the fire department. The fire department hasn't hired in the last, 2 or 3 years?
Yes.
So
and I know, yeah, and I know the department is extremely stretched thin now, but had positions been left open, perhaps there would have been some management options that the department could have exercised in moving people around and moving them back into stations and so on. I don't know, but the point is we don't know because the option wasn't brought before us. So, okay, anything else for the fire department, colleagues? We closed public comment, but if you'd like to address it, maybe in any objection? Okay, go ahead, Mr. McCosker.
I just wanted to thank you, Pat McCosker, United Firefighters. I really appreciate the opportunity. I just wanted to clarify some things. There was no confusion on the fire department among firefighters whether or not you had to retire in or drop. That is absolutely not true. If we had a spike in retirements at this time, it's because we're now 30 years from the big heavy retirements of the 1980s. I was hired in 1980 myself, and a couple hundred of us were. That's why we're retiring now. There was also probably a little bit of dread of the hard closures that you adopted in this year's budget. There were guys that lost their assignments at firehouses they'd worked at for years and years, and there may have been a few retirements because of that dread, no place to land now, being thrown into a pool. But that's really what happened. The reason that the fire department costs you more this year than it did last year, exactly like I said 6 months ago when I was talking against hard closures, permanent closures of fire companies and ambulances, is because under this plan you have slightly more firefighters on duty every day than you had back during the brownouts. Remember the hard sell you were getting from the fire chief on this? He was going to save you more money while putting a few firefighters more back on the street. And he had this magic formula about pension costs and so forth when you asked him hard questions about that. It plain old costs more to staff the fire department at the level we're at now than it did before, because we have more firefighters on duty every day by about 50 or so, I believe. That's where the increased cost is. This boogeyman of overtime is baloney. There's a tipping point, as you know, between the number of live bodies you have on the fire department and the number of vacancies you have to fill every day, and as soon as you reach that tipping point again, you'll be recommended to start hiring firefighters again. And I just want to clarify that. That's what happened here. You were hard sold, and it was dishonest when you were told it was going to save you more money to hard close those fire companies. In the meantime, we now have 6 months of statistics showing what a horrible effect it's had on our response times, and that needs to be addressed. We need to start reopening them quickly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, in light of the hour, I think there's more, lots more that we would discuss. But colleagues, any other questions? CAO? We're good.
Our office would also like to make a correction on one of the attachments that we'd like to submit to the clerk. And
Yeah,
it's
and I
on
think
just
we have
changing an account number in a
I
fund.
think we have some amendments that have already been presented to the clerk. So with that, let's see if we can recap. I would recommend that we approve the CAO's recommendations with the amendments that have already been submitted to the clerk and the additional amendments that this committee approved to delay the reimbursement to the police department relating to Occupy LA and to delay recommendation on the LED loan acceleration that's in recommendation 18B.
That's correct.
Did we do the city attorney one, waiting a month? I want to see the SSR. I mean, I want to see the audit.
That was not before us. That was not raised.
Can I make a motion that we continue their aspect for a month, or is not going to affect it, or how do we deal with that issue? Is it automatically sweep the 1 point whatever million now, or do we have another time frame?
You know what, I would advise if we could leave our recommendation as is.
Yeah.
Obviously, there also will be a year-end report, and if at some point, if it is your desire to allow them to retain some savings, and someone can submit a recommendation at that point, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, thank you. Well, if that's any objection.
Well, I'd still like to see that motion go forward. So if you're making that motion,
put it on the council floor.
I'll second that motion.
Which was the motion?
I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding.
Could you explain what we can do on this? Because I want to listen and look at the letter and appreciate what we just heard from the city attorney's
if the desire is to restore the city attorney's 1.4 million, then I would recommend that there be a corresponding reduction somewhere else to ensure that the budget is balanced. And so I mean, that should be sort of the next step. I wasn't sure what you said when you were going to wait for an audit.
Well, when he mentioned that March, or somebody mentioned March, there's an audit of some sort that would impact this, and you could delay it until there would be that opportunity.
I think you referred to the controller's forecasting on revenue, but that's for next fiscal year.
Yeah, no, that's not the answer. I was trying to appreciate his comment. How did you interpret his comment?
I mean, I interpret when he said the controller's report on revenue, it projects out revenue for the next fiscal year. She submits information in the springtime that gives us, that helps inform what our revenue projections are for the following fiscal year. And so, but that at that point would be relevant for that fiscal year, not for this fiscal year. The revenues for this fiscal year are what they are, which is haven't received the actual receipts yet.
May I add something? Any decision to not sweep funds, of course, does alter the deficit that we reported in the summary section. So just so you know, with regards to the addendum, our projected savings is about 2.9 instead of the 4 million that we identified. So then if we did also decide not to sweep that city attorney money, that would reduce it to 1.5. That's a very small cushion, especially if we do know that we're not going to get the power revenue money or the VLF money, and we just don't know where we're going to pencil out with regards to citywide revenue. So.
My feeling about it is, I mean, clearly the city attorney has suffered mightily. That office has definitely suffered severe cutbacks that have affected other departments, affected our work, affected the potential exposure to liability that the city faces. And I thought that Mr. Carter made a very compelling argument. The difficulty I have is that I think virtually every other city department could make that identical argument, and I'm not able to develop, as I sit here, a policy reason to justify a distinction between the city attorney's office and other departments that are having to eat these ERIP costs now under this FSR. We would have the option going forward of revisiting any reductions to the city attorney's office, of course, anticipating that or taking that into account in next year's budget or even in the next FSR. But speaking personally, I would be reluctant to sort of on the fly make that distinction right now among departments when, you know, all the other departments are hurting badly too and are trying to provide services with limited resources and inadequate resources, including our other public safety departments that have agreed to absorb these or developed a plan to absorb these ERIP costs. So I would not, personally, I would not be supportive of making that recommendation now. We could consider it in council, I suppose, and we could consider a motion before the full council and to have it taken up there, but I wouldn't be prepared to do it on the fly right now myself. Mr. President.
I think you make a fair point. The only reason why I pretty consistently have tried to restore monies in the city attorney's office is it's probably the one department that impacts the finances of the rest of the city. And often by not funding them adequately, it may in the long run cost us more to not defend the city adequately. Certainly is true in the workers' comp arena. You know, the bigger the caseload, the worse job we do, and probably the more money we lose because we don't hit that opportunity.
It's certainly true, but I think you could make the same argument at the CAO's office or the Department of Finance or the fire department, who's going to probably have, you know, additional claims against it because of inadequate supervision or possible increased injuries. I mean, you could pretty much go down the list of departments and, you know, IT and what that costs to all the other departments. You can make that argument for just about it. I mean, look, the truth is nobody has enough resources, and unfortunately our city is suffering as a result of it. So to pick one out of this report, I'm a little reluctant to do that at this point. I think we could certainly have a full discussion about this in council, you know, upon motion. But I would not support making that change now.
Fair enough.
I agree.
Mr. Rosenbaum, you okay? Okay, all right. Well, then, did you get all that? Mr.
Yes, we
Chairman?
got that.
Okay.
And also the additional recommendations as submitted, yes.
They have been submitted, and they will be incorporated into the action of this committee. Okay, thank you very much on that item. Now, is Mr. Wiseman still here? He's not, I don't see him in the room, so we can dispose of public comment. And I'd also like to note and file items 9 through 15, if we may do that. Mr. Strana, maybe we just simply go ahead and note and file those items. And then let's hear numbers, let's see, number 16.
Number
do we
16,
have
yep.
Still?
Yeah,
Okay.
you are correct. Basically, all of those are they're all note and files, and so we can go to item 16, which is the CO report, resolution ordinance relative to authority to issue up to $340 million in general obligation bonds, refunding series 2012-A.
Councilman, sorry, before you move to item 16, on item 15, it's a recommendation to approve that item. It's a donation of computers.
All right, well then,
You
I
can
will
move
go
that on
ahead and
consent,
move approval of the recommendation on item 15, and hearing no objection, that'll be the action of the committee.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Well, I just didn't realize it's just
Good evening.
Hawksville CAO office. The CAO requests authority to issue up to $340 million,
If you could just pull the
million
microphone down just a little bit, and
in
if I could
geo
have to
refunding
be
bonds.
quiet in the room, please. Go ahead.
We currently have identified $228.18 million in outstanding geo bonds that, if refunded, could result in a net present value savings of $24.42 million. Please note that if the market conditions changes at the time of sale, we will either postpone or the transaction will not occur. The refunding bonds will be sold on a competitive basis as required by the charter. At the time the city released this report, we anticipated a sale date of March 6th. Due to timing of certain disclosure information, the controller plans to release their CAFR at the end of the month, and as part of our disclosure documents, we include the CAFR. So it's probably best practice if we just wait for the CAFR and incorporate that document into our bond documents. So we recommend a sale date of March 13. And therefore, we request to revise recommendation number 3 to change the date from March 6 to March 13 for the purpose of the award resolution.
Okay. So in June of last year, the CAO identified about $250 million in existing bonds that, if they were refunded, could generate $20 million or so in savings, and the council subsequently offered authority to do that, issue up to $600 million in new GO bonds. So were those in fact issued? Were those bonds in fact refunded? Where do we stand with that, and do we still have capacity within that authority to be able to address these bonds as well?
Yes, that's correct.
So is this action even necessary then, if you already have $600 million in authority from the council?
We do have authority under the resolution that was approved in June 21st, I believe. This document, or this report, is asking you to ratify that resolution and also approve what we call the preliminary official statement, which is the marketing document and includes our disclosure information. So it's updated information that we would need council to approve.
Gotcha.
Natalie Brill, CAO. Yes, you did give us approval, but the problem is that because we're going to the market, you need to reapprove what we send to the market, the prospectus, the official statement. That's what you're actually approving. You're right, we do have authority, but we still have to come back to you because it's been too long between the old one and the new one. And so the attorneys make us come back so that you all are aware of what we're doing.
So essentially, we're refinancing and realizing some savings here as a result, right? I mean, in lay language?
Yes.
Okay, so how much are we saving in this?
About $24 million.
That sounds good to me. I'm going to move approve. Oh, Mr. Ingram.
Just a quick question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
With the realized savings, are we putting that back in the CAOs? Oh, no, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Sure, we'll take that. Thank you.
Yes.
A zinger. Okay. No, actually, we would pass that savings on to the property owners, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so just so we're aware.
So next
this
year, we will charge,
We're lowering taxes in this.
right, the taxes will go down overall
Right.
by that 24 divided
$4
by
million
the
savings.
10 years or
Property
15
owners, yeah.
years, right.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you.
All right, then I would move the recommendation as amended.
Oh, we got one more.
Oh, Mr. Cardenas.
Mr. Chairman, since we have Natalie here.
Hi,
Natalie.
So close. So
Seconds
close.
away from a clean getaway.
It's officially pre-Valentine's Day night, so
Just wanted to ask you, how's it come in with the report back on the motion that I did, which is beautiful what you're doing here, and the amount of savings on this one particular refinance, et cetera, is awesome. So on that note, what's the timing of us being able to hear that in the Budget Committee?
Well, we were hoping when we came forward with all of our refundings, we would fold the motion into one of them. So when we come back for the MICLA refunding, we'll fold the motion into that one, because that's the general fund one. Because we're doing 3 refundings right now, the GO bond, the wastewater, and the MICLA. So we were hoping to fold that, your motion, into the MICLA
And
refunding.
the timing of you guys coming forward with the MECLA?
To come to Budget and Finance, we're thinking end of this month or
Okay.
beginning of March.
Perfect.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, one last chance with public comment, and I see none, so if there's nothing further, colleagues, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Yes. Heart to heart.